Hi everyone, The Conversation with Nadine Matheson is currently on a little summer break, but don't worry, I'll be back with brand new episodes in September. But in the meantime, I'll be sharing some fan favourite episodes from season 3, along with a few special conversations from Page 1, the writers' podcast that I think you'll really enjoy. Thank you so much for all your support throughout season 3. It's been amazing to see the podcast grow, and I'm truly grateful to everyone who's listened, shared and supported us, especially those of you who've bought me a cup of coffee on Ko-fi. It really does make a difference. Now, as always, sit back, we'll go for a walk and enjoy this summer break conversation.
Hello and welcome to the new season 6, episode 1, alternatively known as episode 53 of the Page 1 podcast. I'm Tariq.
I'm Marco, and thanks for joining us at the Page 1 podcast. If this is your first episode, what the hell have you been doing? Go back and check out all the other great episodes we've got there. You've
been at home for the last year.
Exactly. You must have run out of other good podcasts to listen to.
There's no, we're down to the dregs now.
Exactly.
This is our time to shine.
So, do check it out. We've got some great authors and screenwriters and video game writers and comic writers there in the back catalogue, so please do check that out. At the Page 1 podcast, we like to speak to writers of all kinds, as I just said, about their writing process, how they got into the industry, and chat to them about their work and get as many hints and tips for writing as possible, because Tariq and I are also writers. I was going to say aspiring, but Tariq, you're no longer aspiring.
There's no such thing as an aspiring writer, Marco. You're either a writer or you're not. True.
Okay, let's go with that line. And we have a great writer and director on for
we have a very exciting guest. We are chatting with Alex Garland this week, who you may know from his seminal debut novel The Beach back in 1996, which was made into a pretty big movie by Danny Boyle. Alex went on to then jump into the world of screenplays. He wrote the screenplay for 28 Days Later, Sunshine, Never Let Me Go and Dredd. And then after that, he then made a further jump. It's pretty much my dream career, really. Further jump into directing with Ex Machina, Annihilation, and most recently, Devs.
Yeah, Dave's on in the UK it was on BBC Two. It's on iPlayer, and I think in the US FX. But yeah, it's I have to say I really enjoyed this chat with Alex, because we get really into depth about the writing process and about how he comes up with these projects, and also hear about how he's moved through these different paths, from novels to screenplays to directing. So there's a lot in there. There's also, for fans of video games, because he has written on a video game, as we discuss, but we have a bit of chat about video games as well. And in that chat, there are some spoilers for The Last of Us, part 2. Yes.
Oh, so, I'm 1 maybe as well?
Maybe I'm 1 as well. I'm not sure. No, I don't think so. I think it's mainly part 2. But so if you are wanting to not know about those, you'll hear us start to talk about it, and when we do, I would jump forward about 5 minutes at that point, so you don't get spoiled.
Definitely a game you do not want the ending spoiled.
No, definitely not.
Not many games you would say that about, but I think Last was part 2.
It's highly recommend playing it, as we discuss in the podcast. But it's a really great episode to kick off this season. So I hope you enjoy it. We'll get straight into after a quick advert for our writer's notebook, which you can get from our website. The link is in the podcast description, and then we'll be back at the end of the podcast with a bit more chat and to let you know about next week's guest.
The blank page. To some, it's terrifying, an obstacle to overcome. But we prefer to think of it as an opportunity, a blank canvas to be filled with all of the adventures and characters in our head. So how to overcome that fear? Well, we all know the best advice for a writer is write. Seriously, get words on the page and more will follow.
But what about later, when you start trying to pull those threads of what you've written together? What about the character you wrote about way back at the start? Who was she again? What was she carrying? And where did she leave the MacGuffin that she now really needs in the third act? Think about all those top thrillers you like to read, or that amazing drama you just watched.
What did they all have in common? Structure and planning.
As aspiring writers ourselves, we've tried many different methods to try and organise all the thoughts about the stories we want to tell. We've been there searching for a piece of scrap paper to note something down, or making a quick note on our phone in between meetings.
Or sometimes we'll make a note in whatever notebook we're carrying, or a document on our laptop so we don't forget that great idea. Let's be honest, it can all be a bit messy and it's easy to lose track of everything. And that's when we realised it's not just the story that needs structure and planning, but the way we gather all of our thoughts about it as well.
And so we made Page One. Page One is more than just another notebook. It's a place to put down all your ideas for your latest project, divided into easy-to-use sections that will help you plan your story, so that when that blank page comes calling, you're ready to answer. And then afterwards, once it's written, we realised you need to plan how to let people read it, so we included a section relating to submissions.
Each one is designed for one project, whether you want to write a book, screenplay, a comic, or any other kind of story. We truly believe that when you use it, it will help you get to the main event, writing your story. So we hope this helps.
We can't wait to read what you come up with.
And remember, every story starts with page one.
Did you always want to be a writer? Was that always an ambition?
No, not at all. My dad was a cartoonist, and I grew up around comic books, and I drew a lot, and I thought I'd be a cartoonist too. And then sometime around my late teens, I also got really into backpacking. And because he was a cartoonist, a lot of his friends were journalists. And so I thought there was a sort of a career path that might exist, which was being a journalist, which is writing. Mm-hmm. But sort of very loosely, I was thinking, I love backpacking, and maybe I could be a journalist, maybe I could be a foreign correspondent. And so that was a sort of half-formed thought that arrived in my late teens. And in some sort of vague way, I sort of half pursued it. So when I'd be backpacking, I sort of thought in some weird way, I'm looking for stories. And I even sort of half pretended to be a journalist. Mm-hmm. You know, I blagged a press card so I could go to some demonstration in Hong Kong and Manila and stuff like that, which was a sort of fantasy role-playing version of being a journalist. And then at a certain point, I realized it wasn't for me in various ways. But one of them is I'm just not suited to writing non-fiction because I find it very constricting. I love reading it, but I find it very difficult to write. So it's not a criticism of non-fiction. I adore non-fiction, but if you feel duty bound to describe the thing as it happened, I found I was caveating everything I put down. And if you just invented it, but you based it on a kind of truth, that got around that problem. And then I started writing about my backpacking, not as a kind of journalism, fake journalism, but as just thinking, no, this is fiction. And then that turned into my job. I was 24. Mm-hmm. So I wrote a book about backpacking when I was 24. And that really started my writing life.
And was that what became The Beach then?
That was The Beach. There was a sort of aborted novel I wrote before that then became the second novel I wrote. Like later when I was talking to writers, I learned how typical that is. Mm-hmm. And that in some ways, quite often, what always interested me was that I'd meet writers who knew they wanted to be writers from age 12 or 11 or something, because they loved reading and they got drawn to it. And then they spent their teenage years sort of doing ambitious adolescent dry runs. You know, the first 20 pages of a novel or poetry or short stories or whatever it happened to be. And I've always felt kind of impressed by that. And surprised, like, how could you know that young? Mm-hmm. But yeah, so before this podcast started, we were having a brief conversation about the oblique routes into writing. Mm-hmm. I was thinking, yep, I agree that my route was fairly oblique. So it was sort of cartoons via fake journalism via backpacking, and then suddenly writing a book, and then thinking, oh right, so is that what I am now? I'm a novelist, and then struggled with that for a couple of years and thought, no, I'm not.
Well, once you'd written The Beach, what was your next step then? Did you do the kind of classic route at that point of trying to find an agent to get out there, or
well, actually, what happened was what really happened was so because of the oblique route, I found that, sort of to my surprise, I was a novelist, and everybody knows imposter syndrome. And writers have a complex version of imposter syndrome because many writers are writing but not necessarily published, and so they get to double down on their own imposter syndrome, you know. And but I had a very, very big dose of imposter syndrome, as I guess everybody does, and but what I had was a 20 grand 2-book deal, so I had to write a second book. And so what I did was I cannibalized the aborted novel I'd written as the first book. I was about halfway through that when The Beach came out, and The Beach became, very strangely, a sort of like a old-fashioned paperback bestseller, you know. So it's the sort of book you'd see people reading on the tube, you know. And so then I found myself, I was in a really, really strange place. And very, very quickly, all the publishers who had sort of taken on The Beach as a book to publish, where a whole bunch followed, like international ones after the thing worked in the UK, where suddenly I had a deal now for books 3 and 4. And at that point, I had a real crisis, because I thought, I've stumbled into this. I am essentially not just having imposter syndrome, I am also an imposter on top of, you know, on top of the neuroses. I am actually the real thing. And coincidentally, the book, The Beach, had been optioned to be made into a film. And when I went to visit the film set, I thought, maybe I could do this. Maybe I could write screenplays. So I did a very eccentric thing, which is I was probably only able to do because I was in my 20s and naive, I guess, but also I think scared of the book world. I never felt at home there. And so I paid back the advances and got myself out of the contracts for books 3 and 4. And then wrote a zombie movie. And since then I've been writing, but in the world of films. And I have over the years learned, oh no, you were a writer. Like I now I understand writing. I really feel I really feel a sort of deep kinship with writing. And I was wrong. I was as much a writer as anybody else. I was a young writer, but you know.
That imposter syndrome weighed heavily, obviously, at that point, maybe. Now that you feel like that, would you ever go back to writing a book again, or are you firmly bedded into the world of film now?
Well, I think there's a sort of now I feel comfortable with the idea of saying I'm a writer, which I have done for a while, since my 30s, I guess. I think I can sort of now compare and contrast the differences between writing novels and writing screenplays, and to an extent then also writing for the theatre or writing a poem or like whatever the vehicle for the writing might be. Just go back to the thread of the question.
It was just, would you ever
would I
go back to writing a fiction novel?
So the problem for me with writing novels was that, aside from the fact I found it hard because I think it is hard, it's just a difficult thing to do. It's also incredibly solitary, and I am also a very solitary, quite reclusive person, and having a job that forced me out of that, I thought was sort of psychiatrically healthy, literally. So in some respects, I'd feel anxious about going back to that isolation. But so it's nothing to do with form; it's to do with lifestyle.
Right. Okay. And obviously, the Beach was adapted by Danny Boyle, and then 28 Days later was with Danny Boyle as well. Was it through that connection with Danny that you decided, I'm going to try and write a screenplay? You know, what was it that made you think, I'll try this?
No, actually, the connection really was with a producer he was working with, a guy called Andrew McDonald.
Right.
Because in the film world, I think there's all sorts of ways films get perceived as processes, and because we talk about directors and auteur theory and stuff like that, we have a sense of things flowing from directors. But actually, from a writer's point of view, the primary relationship is really with the producer, because it's the producer to whom the writer sends the script. So the process is something like a writer writes, shows it to a producer, the producer and the writer work on it together, and then the producer goes about setting the film up.
Right.
So it's the producer that then approaches a director and a film studio and stuff. So yeah, it was Andrew McDonald, who had made a sequence of films with Danny, Shallow Grave and Trainspotting, Life Less Ordinary, and so just after they'd finished The Beach, me and Andrew went for a pizza actually in Charlotte Street in London, and I was just at the moment of thinking privately, I can't write more books, I can't do it. And I said, look, I've got this idea for a zombie movie set in London, and I had two things. I said some of it would be in daylight and the zombies would run. And he said, yeah, that sounds like a really interesting idea. And years later, I learned producers always say that, because why would they put you off working very, very hard and maybe producing a script that they want, you know? And in my mind, I thought over that pizza, my God, he's going to make it into a film.
Yeah.
So I then, like, in a frenzied way, set about writing this running zombie movie, and incredibly it did work out. Of course, Andrew, very experienced producer, and it was Andrew that brought in Danny, not me.
Right.
And when you went back and you thought, right, I'm gonna turn this running zombie idea into a script, you know, when you sat down to actually write that, what was the writing process like for you writing a script going from writing books? Was it quite a change? Was it quite a challenge?
Yeah. It was exactly like writing a book for the first time. Yeah. Because so what happened with books was I liked reading, and I liked conceptually the idea of writing a book, but I'd never conceptualized what would it actually be to write a book. So all sorts of things that people who do dry runs do is they start learning things like how you attribute dialogue. Do you say he said, she said at the end of every sentence? Do you say he said, she said, and then allow the reader to infer who is now doing this? Or do you not do it at all? And does the word said count as a repetition? I knew repetitions were a bit clumsy and weird, but did said count as a word? Like, how many times could you use the word said on a page? And so I remember this really clearly. I took books off my bookshelf, this is while writing The Beach, and I looked at J.G. Ballard and Graham Greene, and saw how they used the word said, and I saw they did it in completely different ways. So so in a way, what I'm saying is I had a huge amount of naivety going into it, and with screenplays, it was identical, and I repeated that process. So I said to Andrew, can you send me a screenplay so I know what one looks like? And then on a sort of early version of Word, I spent ages trying to format the thing So I'd do like 10 spaces, so or more, so that the dialogue thing appeared in the middle of the screen, and then I'd do 2/3 that number, so the dialogue was slightly offset from the name of the character, blah blah blah. And I actually picked up some idiosyncrasies of script writing, formatting that I've kept all the way since then, from trying to copy what a script looked like on a program that was not designed to write scripts.
And with scripts, obviously, slightly differently from novels, although I suppose you do get edits on novels as well. But is that, as you said, it's a more collaborative process where you're, it's not just here's my book and hand it in and walk away kind of a thing. How do you react to feedback, and do you enjoy that collaborative process when you're trying to craft the story and make it the final product?
I did. I knew very well that I had a lot to learn, and so I went in with a lot of humility. And when people said you should do this, I'd think, okay, that's what I should do.
Okay. And
then gradually, over the course of 28 days later, I began increasingly to think, no, but I don't think that's right. I really don't think that's right. I wrote 50 something drafts of 28 days later, and about 30 of them were to do with me not having learned yet to fight my corner.
Right.
And what I think is that film is absolutely collaborative, but I also arrived in film from having been a novelist. And so you couldn't persuade me that authorship lay entirely with a director, because I'd come from novels and I knew that integral to authorship was characters, locations, themes, what the characters are saying, why they're saying them, and all of those things are contained in a script. So So once I'd sort of politicized myself and thought, hang on, there's an element of this which is like complete bullshit, just doesn't stand up to any scrutiny at all, I then started really digging my heels in. Danny is a terrific director, and I learned an awful lot from Danny, but it did mean at a certain point we couldn't work together anymore. And because essentially I stopped being up for things being changed. And I don't want to sound fascistic about it, but film is collaborative, but you are the key you are the key person within your area. So the real collaboration is they have the key input into what lens is being used, and if they say, I think it should be this lens and the camera should be over here, you listen to them before you start trying to change anything. So that's the collaboration, but it doesn't just mean deferring to everyone else's opinion.
I think I'd read that. I think it was just when Ex Machina was coming out, and which obviously was a film that you wrote and directed, and you were saying basically that even though this was a film that you had made yourself, in more ways than you ever had prior to that, you still didn't really feel like it was your film because it was so many other people were involved in it, the actors, the musicians, etc. And is that part of that whole process of working with a whole group of people?
Yeah, my issue with auteurist principle, which would basically be to apply the concept of novel writing and drop it onto a film, it's authorship essentially, is that it's typically at other people's expense. And so I think that the reason why I never felt ownership was because I never felt authorship. If in Ex Machina you had changed the director of photography and kept everyone else the same, you would have a different film.
Yeah,
it would have things in common. It would have lots of things in common, but it also wouldn't be the same film. And then there's a big list of departments you could include in that, and also actors, obviously. And so it's very difficult for me to sort of stand there and say, yes, I'm the creative voice behind all these departments when you're not. So but it's just as simple as that.
And I mean,
why I don't take a film by credit.
Right. Okay.
I've always had a problem with the film by credit. I don't like it. I think it's kind of impolite, and I think that I think it's impolite and it's also inaccurate. And it seems to me like a novelist can say, Hilary Mantel wrote this book. That seems like a completely legitimate claim, and I don't think that equivalent claim exists in film.
And before you started directing, some of your other scripts were, well, I'm thinking of Never Let Me Go was an adaptation, which is obviously a slightly different process again, because you're not, it's not your story to be, you're adapting it from that source. I mean, how did you find that process?
Well, so the whole thing is always a learning process that never really stops. I think Never Let Me Go was the thing where I learned the most important final lesson about writing that allowed me to feel like I can legitimately call myself a writer, even though I have a very limited amount of writing within this thing, because it's in some ways it's almost transcribed from someone else's bit of writing. But it really enabled me to look under the hood of writing and say, oh, I get, okay, that's what it is. Yes, I'm doing that, except I do it like this and he does it that way. And so weirdly, that very faithful adaptation was the thing that I felt made me feel comfortable sort of meeting somebody and them saying, what do you do? And I'd say, I'm a writer. The thing that's paradoxical about that is that what I learned when I lifted the hood was, and this is going to sound like I'm being kind of overly humble, but I actually really mean it. I really mean what I'm about to say. It's just true. What I learned when I lifted the hood was I learned that I was not being a good writer. I was being a really kind of probably a bit showy sometimes, and sometimes with actual flair. And what I saw was the depth of the thinking in the way themes and characters and story belong together. So what I'd do is I'd have a theme, which was something I cared about. I had some characters which were effectively related to the theme. But if the storyline and the themes began to diverge, which they had done significantly in the film I had just done, which is a film called Sunshine, I kind of would be, I sort of took sort of like a bad builder. I sort of thought, well, I'll use some plaster and then I'll never know that RSJ doesn't quite fit into that wall, and I'll hang a picture over that crack or something. So and I did that. I did it very kind of consciously in a weird way. And then I saw that. So with that book, here's the thing, right? Never Let Me Go. Kazuo Ishiguro, clearly, now a Nobel Prize winning writer. So, he's as respected as it gets, right? So what I found was that it didn't matter where I looked. Everything connected, joined up, had been thought through. The level of thinking in it, just the pure level of thinking, was so deep. Now, that doesn't mean you've got to say you like it. But this was like having a really good look around an old Aston Martin or something and thinking, wow, those engineers were very clever when they found a route around how to make the suspension or something like that. So it was like that. I knew enough about cars to be able to understand how well made this car was. And I thought very, very consciously, I need to up my game. I need some lessons learned.
But how, like, so you kind of identified that from that, but how did that then, when you next came to a problem like in Sunshine, if the characters and the storyline and the theme start to diverge, what approach, what changed? What did you bring to it that you didn't have the same problems? Right. Okay.
Be rigorous. I got a good lesson. This would be like the bigger version of this same lesson, right? So I was working with another screenwriter right at the start. I'd just done 28 Days Later. I'd been hired to do a job working with another guy. It was for something for the BBC, and it never worked out. And there was a section in the story, and I said, the thing is, the real problem is, what this person would really do at this moment is call the police. And I was trying to engineer reasons why they couldn't call the police, like the phone line had been cut or something. Yeah. And the other writer said, no, you've got this all wrong. Like, if what they do is call the police, then you have them call the police, and then you figure out what happens next. And that was one of those really simple, brilliant bits of advice. And what I was doing with themes where they're a bit more nebulous and abstract than you would call the police at this moment. Yeah. What I was doing was I was not bothering to call the police. And because they're a little bit harder to get hold of, it was easy. You could fudge it.
Yeah.
And what Ishiguro showed me was, if you fudge it, you can fudge it, but it will be less good. So make a decision. Do you want to try to be good or not? How interested in the craft are you? Are you going to get serious about the craft or not? So I thought, I will get serious about it.
And does that lead to, have you started since that moment? It strikes me as something that you might get so far into a project that you're writing and you just can't see. Yeah, exactly. You would just ditch it.
Yeah, and one of the great things about a screenplay in comparison to a novel is that you can discover whether to ditch it after 5 weeks.
Right.
And so I've written many, many screenplays and discovered this equation just doesn't add up. Mm-hmm. If you follow through, you will be you'll be doing at best very mediocre screenwriting. So just stop, do something else. Now I realize that makes me then sound like I must be writing better than mediocre, but what I'd say is that these things are attached to your internal sense of aspiration. Mm-hmm. So it's not what you actually achieve, but it's how hard you are on yourself in your attempt to achieve it.
Yeah.
And when you were writing Never Let Me Go, and then later on Annihilation, both of which were adaptations of previous books, when you're turning that into a script, because what works for a book doesn't always work well for a film, and I've certainly seen a number of films which are from a book and they've slavishly adapted it to the detriment of the film. And how do you know? Is it kind of like a kind of innate thing, knowing what worked well for screen, or a conscious choice to say this has to change completely, otherwise it just won't work on the screen?
So I think what happened was, the first time I did an adaptation was Never Let Me Go, and I thought to myself, this guy's a really, really great writer. I need to be as faithful as is humanly possible. Mm-hmm. So that's what I did. And then by the time I got to Annihilation, it was actually the third adaptation I'd done, because I also did a comic book character, Dredd, Judge Dredd, from 2018. And with Dredd, I thought, I can't faithfully adapt this because we will not have the money to bring that world to the screen. Mm-hmm. But what I can do is faithfully adapt the character. And so that sort of like decoupled me from the anxiety of being overawed by something. And I then, by the time I got to Annihilation, by that time, I'm sort of like an old dog. I've been doing this over 20 years, and I'm kind of up for taking sort of craft/creative risks. So with Annihilation, I did something really weird, like a very weird thing to do, which was I got sent the book by a producer saying, are you interested in adapting this? I read it, and about halfway through, I thought, this is not adaptable. But it's a very interesting novel. I love the novel. I love what it's making me feel and what it's making me think, but you can't make this into a film. And then at the end of it, I thought, no, I think I'll give this a shot. But what I proposed was privately to myself, only to myself, is I'm not going to reread this book. I'm never going to look at it again. Because the act of reading the book is like a dream. So I'm going to do an adaptation of my memory of this book, which is a very sort of meta type thing to do. But I felt for that particular novel was very appropriate because it's essentially a surrealist dreamscape zone. And so I think by that time, for whatever, I had the kind of, you see, it probably sounds like arrogance, but it's not. It's actually being really interested in craft. It's really being interested in, like, what is writing, what is filmmaking, where are these parameters shiftable? Is that a reasonable thing to do? Like, would it be reasonable? You see, I would say with Hamlet, I suspect that would be stupid to do an adaptation of Hamlet from memory, because so much of what is vital about Hamlet is in the absolute specificity of the exact lines. So you are doing nothing positive, but I mean, except in the most kind of like limited sort of thought experiment type way. It'd basically be a fucking stupid thing to do. But in the case of Annihilation, I actually thought this is respectful to the text and legitimate because of what it feels like to read the book. And I, of course, not everybody agrees with that and would say it was maybe equally as stupid to adapt Annihilation in that way as Hamlet. But you know, whatever.
No, but I thought, because I read the book before I saw the film, and obviously they're very different things, but they both gave the same sense. Like the start of the book, I remember reading, and it was a very sort of detached but eerie kind of feeling as you were reading the opening of the book. And the film as well gave you that sense, even though, as you say, the story it diverges quite a lot from what's in the book. So
that's really fascinating. Because sorry, I don't want to cut you off.
No, absolutely.
But just to say, so this is why I found it. It's why I found the thing so intriguing, is because in a way, what you're saying when you say that is what is reading a book. You know, what is it? Is it reasonably reducible to the sequence, the sort of experiential sequence of events as you go from page one to the last page? The feeling of reading, the atmosphere of reading. When people don't like an adaptation, very often what they're not liking is the tone. Yeah. Because it's the same characters and they're broadly doing the same thing, but it's like seeing an animated version of Tintin, and you think, well, that's not what Tintin sounds like. And so it's a kind of so anyway, sorry I interrupted, but exactly what you said was exactly the thing that I thought that would be interesting to adapt the experience. To actually adapt the experience of reading it, anyway.
No, I mean that's all I was really saying, and I think in that sense it was a great. Certainly for me, it worked perfectly. And
the shouting bear, one of the creatures that I think I couldn't get on my head for quite a while after watching it. That scene was fantastic. Yeah, no, I thought it was a great film, and I know what you mean about the tone of something and. And I've often found that even with stories or films that are based on true events, and if they've changed, you know, people often get quite annoyed if a film based on true events changes the events and they say, oh, it's not actually that accurate anymore. But I remember watching, I think it was the Alan Turing movie, and I know there's a fair bit of that which is not true, it's not factually correct. But I did feel that the way the emotions that I felt watching it, I thought were true enough that, you know, it kind of, I got what it was doing, and the reason why it changed it was to, you know, try to boil that down to like a moment.
It's a very it gets itself into a difficult space though when it's saying this is true.
Yes, that's a fair point. Yeah.
Because you could you could then significantly change a historical event, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. Yeah.
But I take your point, and of course in that film they're not trying to do that.
I suppose they're trying to give the gist of it. Creating events to show one event happening that was actually happening.
What they're really doing is that thing that they always do on biopics, which is like Johnny Cash, and someone says like, "Hey, what's that ring of fire?" And Johnny
that's right.
Around and says, "What did you say?" The most incredible example of that I saw recently was that Queen one, Freddie Mercury story. I thought it was very funny because I suspect very self-aware. It sort of went hell for leather for that particular.
I've not actually seen that. The only thing that I've seen is there's a scene in that film that has become sort of a big thing for the amount of edit, the amount of cuts. There's one scene where they're all sitting around a table outside at a bar or something, and it's like a minute-long scene, but every second is a cut to something else. Cut, and for a chat around the table, it's a bit excessive.
It's a good film to talk about if one's going to get into the reality behind auteur theory, because the director of that film got sacked halfway through, and the guy Dexter Fletcher really hated it. And you may be seeing the tension between that.
Yeah.
And I do have to ask about Dredd. I think we're both big fans of Dredd. I thought the film was fantastic. Or both the comic and the movie. The latest movie, not the Stallone version, is it's got its own place and time. But and I did wonder. Obviously, you're a big fan of comic books yourself, and how did you get involved in that? And I know you wrote scripts or outlines for films 2 and 3, which sadly I don't think we're ever going to see now.
Well, I mean, you might, but not as anything to do with me. I mean, you never know. In as much as a license is as sort of interesting as that, probably is not over, I would say. Like I said, I grew up around comic books. My dad was interested in American comic books largely, and I got really into reading 2000 AD. And a long time later, a film executive who had been the guy who basically made The Beach and 28 Days Later and Sunshine and Never Let Me Go. So I sort of knew him reasonably well by then. Said, "Hey, what about Judge Dredd?" He's actually a British guy who lives and works in America. He was working at Fox back then. And I immediately thought, that's a great, I would love to do Judge Dredd. I would absolutely love to do it. And then the next thing I thought was an acute awareness of the Stallone movie, which I'd watched as a fan and was underwhelmed. And so what I did was, the first thing I did was to get on a train and go up to the Northwest and track down John Wagner, who wrote it. And I said to John, "Look, I really would love to adapt Dredd, and what I'm gonna do is write the character and try and find a story which stops us having to look too far in a way." And then just when we see, one of the things about Dredd as well, which helps in an adaptation, is Wagner went back to it, but there were lots of writers, lots of artists, lots of tones. So sometimes Dredd was dead serious, and other times it was almost slapstick comedy. And so actually it gave me quite a lot of freedom. But the main thing about Dredd was it was sort of Dredd fan stuff. You can't take his helmet off. He's not cute. He's not suddenly going to be cute and fall for the girl. Something. It's that kind of, But that aside, it then became like war. Not as war. that film was a very, very, very challenging, difficult movie to make in sort of what felt like limitless ways at the time. It was political, complicated, and I got rabid about it. I got absolutely rabid. I walked off the film actually for a few months because I was so angry about some of the things that were being done, and then I was allowed to walk back on. And I think it's because I loved Dredd. Actually, it was a childhood thing, and I just couldn't deal with it being fucked with in a certain kind of way.
Yeah. I mean, I as someone that grew up reading 2000 AD as well, again, I thought the portrayal of Dredd was brilliant. It's just
Carl was good, wasn't he?
He was very good.
Fantastic.
Because he wasn't one of, because 2000 AD fans, they always like cycle through actors like Clint Eastwood. Or there'll be some guy like who's got a big chin.
Yeah, that's right.
And he's like 5'2" or something, and he's not really the right guy at all. But he's got a great chin.
Yeah.
And then they'll Photoshop like the helmet.
Yeah, that's right.
He's perfect. And Carl was interesting because Carl was a big comic book fan. He read every single Dredd.
Wow.
Every single one.
Wow. Yeah.
And anyway, sorry I cut you off.
No. I was just going to say that it was a shame that it didn't lead to films 2 and 3 because I did enjoy it so much. I wondered with that as
I'm glad actually. I'm glad.
You're glad that it's just a standalone.
Why is that?
Well, I am. I'm really, really glad that happened, and it's because unless you have a lot of internal creative strength of a certain sort and a lot of backup from a certain world, a financial world, studio world, you will compromise yourself on 2 and 3 severely.
Right. Okay.
You'll get exhausted. You'll not you, me. I'd second guess myself. What happened was it was a nightmare to make. It was very difficult. It survived by the skin of its teeth. The film had a lot of heart, and people reacted to that. And now what it is it's like a sort of cult movie for people who dig it. Yeah. It wasn't a big hit, but people who like it really like it for the right reasons. And if I had been doing 2 and 3, I almost guarantee I'd have squandered that.
Yeah, it has. It is definitely one of these movies that's growing bigger the more time has passed. Really, I think.
Well, it could only grow bigger. That was its only route in life.
I mean, actually, I think one of the reasons it didn't do well is that it was marketed, it was Dredd 3D, and they pushed the 3D angle so hard that it was at a time that people...
It was dumped. It was dumped.
Yeah.
I mean, okay. But also, people weren't interested. Actually, in truth, the Stallone movie was absolutely toxic. It's one of those things, weirdly. It's very, very strange, right? It's a terrible, terrible movie. But lots of people have seen it.
Yeah. It's more than the recent one, which is weird.
Way more. Way more. And it's one of the funny, if a film's been around for a long time, if it's got a big film star like Stallone, if it crops up on Channel 4 at 11 o'clock at night, or these days Netflix or whatever, by the time we came out, everybody had seen Dredd and everyone thought it was crap. And so we were sort of dead out of the gate.
Yeah.
And and then after that, you did move into directing, and I'm just wondering how you made that step up from, or step across, however you want to describe it, into actually directing as well as writing.
Well, I think, the first thing, I don't know. To be honest, I'd done a fair amount of directing before. And I sometimes feel like I'm being disingenuous if I say Ex Machina was the first bit of directing I did, because it wasn't. I was actually, I was quite comfortable with it, but also I approached it as a writer. So now I've lost my imposter syndrome. If somebody does say to me, "What do you do?" I say I'm a writer. That's my job description. And for me, often directing is about just not having to have a director there.
Right.
That's I've written a script. The script is like the architect blueprint to make the building. Someone else has got to decide which, tables go in the bar or whatever, but my key bit of work is the script. And then it's about just trying to have all this team communicating with each other. And, like we were talking about form and stuff like that, structure and form, which is in some ways what I'm most interested in, like on a personal level.
Yeah.
And any frame of a film, it's got a proper symphony happening. Sound design, score, acting, script, lighting, a grip pushing a dolly, the cameraman on the dolly,
costume,
hair,
yeah.
It just goes on and on and on. And at that moment, all of these things are working together. And I find that aspect of the craft really, really fascinating. And I feel like my big act is to write a script. That's my big contribution. And then what I'm trying to do is just facilitate the meeting point between all these disciplines, and really not get in their way often. Just for help by clearing a path rather than by creating the path.
And when you sit down to actually write, what's your style? Do you plan it all out? I think I'd read somewhere that you said you always know the ending, and it's kind of about how you get to that point. And is that true for everything you do, or is that only certain projects, or is that total nonsense?
No, that's true. That's true. On things where I've controlled the ending, I've always known the ending.
Okay.
So start with an ending, and then what I do is I write a very, very simple sequence of beats out, and they're sort of like nudges, and I don't elaborate the beats because I know. So if one of the beats is they go into house, encounter mutant bear, and if I then start elaborating on that, I'll end up writing that scene.
Yeah.
And I won't know how I got there or what comes next. So, and I think, one of the really interesting things about being a writer is that you can get kind of stuck on ideas, not stuck as in, I don't know what the idea is, but trapped in an idea.
Yeah.
Because it can feel incredibly precious. And so if I fuck with this idea, this bit of magic will turn to smoke and I'll never get it back and all that kind of thing. But actually, this was another of my early lessons. It's a job you never get promoted. And you if you're going to have a career, you could write one book and that would be great. That would be like you did this great album in 73 and that's what you're known for, that great album, but if you're going to have a career, you are absolutely relying on the fact that you will continue being able to have ideas, because you're not promoted. You're always the person who's going to have to be doing that. You will always get the blank page. You will, and there's no delegation. So I don't worry about the story beats too much because it's baked into the whole thing that when I get there, I'll have to be inventing stuff just like I do every other day of my working life, I learned that from my dad because my dad was a cartoonist, and everyone used to say to my dad, how do you know you'll come up with an idea for a cartoon every day? Because that's what he had to do. Yeah. And he was just like, because that is basically what my job is. And in some senses, on some level, the writer's job is having that idea and then having sufficient craft to convey it.
And when you're doing a draft of a screenplay, are you someone that do you try and blast through the draft to get to the end that you've thought of, and then go back to it, or do you revise it as you go? But the first,
the last thing I did was this 8-part TV show, Devs, and I did not revised. The first draft was basically the shooting script, apart from a couple of changes here, and it was written. It was round about 2.5 weeks an episode, 2 to 2.5 weeks an episode, depending on the episode, and that's where I've ended up. I've got a film which I hope to make next year. I've written one draft, and I really hope I don't have to rewrite it. And I think I don't know. It's terribly hard talking about these things because I never want to sound prescriptive, but it's all to do with the route you've chosen to take, the thing you were interested in. And I can see a lot of value in writing and rewriting and rewriting. So, for example, Ishiguro, I know, writes a massive, massive amount. He writes a novel. His first draft novel is 6 to 8 times the length that the novel will end up being. And that makes an awful lot of sense to me. But on the thing I'm interested in a way, the leaner I get at it, the better. That's just the kind of writing I'm interested in. So, yeah.
And a lot of the stuff that you make, I'm thinking of Annihilation, Ex Machina, and Devs. It's very visual. There's a really visual feel to it. You know, whether it's the imagery of stuff or it's just the feeling that you get watching it. And is that the way that you write? Do you see that? You know, are you trying to capture that image that you have in your head, or is that something that comes afterwards?
Yeah, it's that I grew up drawing. My teenage years were not spent writing; they were spent drawing, and so I think in pictures, and usually I have a very, very clear idea of what I want something to look like. And in fact, where I started to stop being able to work in directors, that's where it began. It didn't look right, and I couldn't get that needle out of my head.
Did that affect as well the way that you wrote your screenplays, knowing that it would be you that would be directing it?
So yeah, I mean, like a lot of people, again, I don't want to sound self-deprecating, sort of overly sort of British bullshitty way, but I read a screenplay very, very early on. It was just after writing 28 Days Later, and it was Walter Hill's rewrite of Alien. Alien had been through a lot of writers, started with a guy called Dan O'Bannon, and then you read Walter Hill's script and you electrically feel in the film. And you also see how much of the film is contained in the script, actually. And what Walter Hill did, I then copied. So I sometimes see screenplays and it will say, interior cafe day, a waitress glides between tables as a couple lean towards each other. And I'll say, and then go on for another 10 lines. And I'll write interior couple day, 2 people sit opposite each other, and then get into the dialogue. I just everything I say is it's all sort of writing theory in a weird kind of way. So with The Beach, I wrote this book. It was supposed to be a criticism of the backpacker scene, and about half the people, including Danny, actually, who made it into a film, saw it as a celebration of the backpacker scene.
Yeah.
And that was like a very clear demonstration of what we all know, but also instantly forget, which is that 50% of the narrative is the reader. And and essentially whole chunks of books needn't exist in some respects. They're basically nudges for the reader's imagination. And I lent hard in that direction. And I think why I love screenplays is that they become the sort of most distilled version of that. There's so much space, you know?
No, but it is, as you say, it's such a different, because Tariq and I have written some screenplays together, and yet we both write novels as well, and there's such a different thing that you
have
do
a look
have.
At Walter Hill's. Have a look at Walter Hill's Alien screenplay.
Yeah, no, we will.
It's available online. Have a look at it, because if you care about writing, it's the bluntest yet most beautiful writing. It just shows you how few words are required.
Yeah.
It's like haikus. I absolutely love it. Anyway, sorry.
No.
You guys have written screenplays.
Yeah. No. But all I was saying was that they're such a different form, and I think the best screenplays, the screenplays that I have read, the best ones are those ones that are so lean but at the same time, as you read them, you can absolutely see you're taken into what they're trying to do. Yeah.
Well, they're a very pure bit of writing, because they are really communication, writing as communication.
Yeah,
they exist partly so that every department knows what they need to do within a scene.
Yeah, that's right.
And so they're not really directed at readers; they're directed at technicians. So they're like manuals or something. You know, and yeah, I really like that. But I also think, I remember I had this in me before, because I remember reading Name of the Rose a long time ago, and just skipping page after page after page, because I just thought, I don't need to know that, don't need to know that, don't need to know that. And so it is one form of reading. You know, there are lots. It's a broad church how you choose to approach reading. And the kind of reader I am then is also the kind of writer I am, I suppose.
When you're doing something like Dave's, which obviously was just on recently, how do you know a story? You know, did you imagine that idea as a story for an episodic, a limited TV series, as opposed to a film? Yeah, it came to you as that.
Yeah, because I'd been contracted to. So I'd had a rough ride in film, like one way or another. A good ride, because I'd always managed to get stuff made, but it hadn't been fun. And creatively, like a film like Annihilation, that's its creative intent is as it was intended. I mean, it is the thing it was intended to be as much as.
Yeah.
But it was a hell of a fight getting there, and I was tired of that fight. I'd just been worn down by the endless brinksmanship, the sort of endless, well, if you do that, I'm off.
Yeah.
No, you know, you just it works, but it's exhausting. And by then, that television company, FX in America, they knew what they were going to get. And so I wasn't going to disappoint them when I delivered it, because they understood this is the kind of stuff this guy's going to come up with.
So had they come to you and said,
yeah,
it's a show? Okay, I see. Right.
So they came to me and said, would you like to try working in television? And I bit their hand off.
Yeah. Okay.
And so then, like with Ex Machina, you know, one of the reasons I wrote Ex Machina was because I thought, you know, Dredd had bombed, Never Let Me Go had bombed, Sunshine had bombed. I know enough about the film industry now to know I'll never get more than $15 million for a film. So I'm going to write a film that I'm pretty sure we can make for $15 million. And I'm very pragmatic like that. And with devs, I thought, okay, so these guys are giving me a free hand. I think I've got enough energy in me to write 8 episodes, probably not 10. So I need an 8-episode story. I'm really interested in a whole bunch of questions that are a little bit too sort of involved really to do I'd have to be rattling through them if it was a movie. And so I've had them in the back of my mind for a while, and I could have made a movie out of any one of them, but in this they all cross-relate. Like if we were having a drink together, I would be cross-relating these different things, not focusing on one of them. TV series, okay, right, I can do this thing about free will and quantum physics or whatever, you know, and so then I just wrote it.
And given the experience that you had on that, is TV something that you want to work in again then?
I would, it's the thing that was most like writing a novel since I stopped writing novels.
Right.
Because a movie is not at all like a novel, really. It's like a novella or a long short story. It's in that sort of weird space between, do you call this a short story or a novella? That's really what movies are. Like if you look at The Godfather or something, which doesn't feel like that, but one of the reasons it doesn't feel like that is The Godfather really is two films. If you ignore the third, it's really two films, and both of them are very long films, and you could parcel them out into 6 hours of TV, essentially. So it reminded me a lot of novels, and what that means. What that means is it's exhausting in the way a novel is exhausting. It's the thing about a screenplay, because it's a short story, a film. You can hold all the pieces in your head. Yeah. You can keep all the stuff suspended. So someone walks up and says, "Oh, look, this thing on this page or this character," and you can say, "Yeah, that's because da 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 da." And with a novel, you can do it, but it's a big part of your brain, like why that character, how you implied that this character thought this thing because you were going to pick that up 15 pages. That's a lot to hold suspended, and that is what a TV show is like. So the thing I'm going to try to do next is not that. I'm going to try and make a movie because I need some oxygen, and books always scared me. Writing books always scared me. And I think TV scares me in the same way, but that doesn't mean I won't do it again. It's just anxiety producing, I suppose.
And you've also written, you wrote a video game story as well.
I just want to say, just because you just said Tariq had just written a book, and I said like, oh, well done. I really, really do mean that. Like I think there's this sort of really kind of irritating sort of it's like there's something sort of pious about it, where someone will say writing's hard, and someone will say, well, it's not like I worked down a coal mine or something. And it isn't like you work down a coal mine, but that in no way means it's not hard. And writing a book is really, really hard. It's challenging on so many levels. It's technically challenging for the reasons of the suspension of all the stuff. It's emotionally challenging. You're going to have to face any amount of self-doubt, and because it's a fucking book, you're going to have the self-doubt for like 2 years. And so when I said it, I wasn't being glib. I really meant it, because I thought, I remember that well enough to know what that's like, and it's no joke. So congratulations.
Thank you. Cheers. No, I think you're right. I think there is. I can definitely see, like, the scripts that I've written with Marco. They are easier to hold in your head. They're
just
are
easier.
smaller. Yeah,
they're just easier. They're much easier.
Shorter stories, or shorter 2 hours worth of stuff. Yeah,
it's just much easier. It's much easier. Ian McEwan, I think it was Ian McEwan. I'm going to pretend it was Ian McEwan. Said this thing about writers. He said 2 really good things about writers, except he probably didn't say either of them. but then he probably did. Anyway, so it's about. So one of them is about making sure you do living between projects, and that's very sensible. But the other is about, which is the relevant one here, is about every now and then, once or twice a year, a writer gets on a roll and they have these 2 days where it's like them, like Angela Lansbury on that TV show, and she's like tossing bits of paper. And it's like, for a writer, it's the best feeling ever. It's like this wonderful feeling. And all the rest of the time, they're pursuing that feeling again. And I think that's very, very true. And I think the great thing about screenplays is you can do the whole thing in that 3-day way.
Yeah.
And so so I think that's why I like screenplays, and I really rate screenplays. I think there's wonderful craft in it. I'm not going to be relativistic about the different mediums, but I do think there are some basic levels where it's easier than writing novels. It just is.
Yeah, and I was just bringing up the fact that you'd written a video game as well. I mean, what was that like?
Well, I didn't.
Okay.
I mean, what happened was I love video games, and this guy Tamim and his company had made this game, and what they needed was a writer to write the dialogue for the scenes they had already.
Okay, I see.
I see.
And in fact, already kind of had pretty much the dialogue, and so I really wanted to see, like, as you can probably tell, I'm super interested in craft. Like, I wanted to know, what is the craft of writing for video games?
Yeah.
And so they're generous when they say that, right? But I worked on it really hard. I did what I could. I mean, I tried as hard as I could, but I didn't write that video game in the way Tariq wrote his book.
Okay.
Yeah, we've chatted to a few folk who mainly make games, and they've kind of said that it does sound like a very, very different type of writing. And I think it would be very interesting to really learn that kind of craft, because I think, you're writing possible dialogue that might never be said, or if you trigger something and it's branching pathways and stuff.
Yeah, there is that. But there's also video games have a complicated relationship with narrative, because the medium is both incredibly suited for narrative and also very not suited.
Yeah.
And the basic problem that video games have is that the narrative is likely to get splintered at any moment by a problem-solving exercise.
Yeah.
And you're not actually thinking about the character anymore. Are you guys gamers?
Yeah.
Yeah, both are. Yeah.
So you played The Last of Us. And BioShock.
Yeah.
The thing that BioShock did it too, for me it did it at any rate, but what The Last of Us did was it somehow managed to keep full commanding control of the story while the game was unfolding.
Yeah.
And there are maybe, God of War, the most recent God of War, it also did that. It also managed to keep the story alive. There are a handful of games that can do that. And there are truckloads of books and films that can do that.
Yeah.
Because they're comfortable with their own medium.
Yeah.
So the kind of thing I remember is one of the first conversations I had about that game was they were saying, we want this protagonist to be a real, this is not my word, by the way, they're a real badass, right? And so he's walking along this bridge, and there's this guy trying to climb up the bridge, and he looks down and he stamps on his hand and he falls to his death. And that shows how much of a badass he is. And I said, but because I'm thinking like a filmmaker or a novelist, and I'm saying, well, that doesn't mean he's a badass. It means he's it means he's just a completely innocent person who could have just helped up, And what was interesting was that you even had to have that conversation. Now, if you went into a group of Hollywood executives and you were pitching it the other way around, they'd say, hang on a minute, you are distancing me from the protagonist.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a cultural, there's a sort of cultural difference there. I think that's why I find The Last of Us and God of War, and weirdly this little game I've been playing on the Switch recently called Hades.
Right.
Oh yeah.
Which has a really quite strong narrative thread running through it, and so games have this huge power, but only a few of them are really flexing the muscle.
Yeah.
I mean, we spoke to a guy called Ian Dallas who made a game. Have you played What Remains of Edith Finch? A game. It's a little indie game.
Yeah, it's like one of those Gone Home games.
Yeah,
exactly.
It is.
Yeah.
They call them walking simulators or whatever. But it was really fascinating speaking to him in terms of, it's like a little series of short stories almost, but wrapped in this narrative that they've got. And for him, he was more focused on what he was trying to create. I think his goal was to, he wanted to create a feeling with in the player in each story, and it's a very successful game in that sense, because somehow they pull you right in a way, because you're in control of the character. It can do that in a way sometimes that other mediums can't, but at the same time, he's always thinking about the technical side of it as well when he's trying to do that. So it definitely is a different craft. It would be something fascinating to get into.
But something fascinating, because that there's a sort of there's an innately blurred fourth wall.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So whereas like the mediums that we work in, the funny thing is that our fourth wall is always being broken,
mm-hmm.
but we don't allow for it in a funny way. So that act of imagination that means that two people read the same book differently is in a way a sort of that is that page human sort of line getting messed with.
Mm-hmm.
But video games do it overtly, and at some point there'll be like Tolstoy and Chekhov and
mm-hmm.
Scorsese, but at the moment it's a very small gang.
It is definitely.
Yeah, and BioShock did an interesting thing where it kind of made the fact that the player was pushing buttons, moving sticks, part of the narrative itself, and it kind of became more than the game story. It was
so clever what BioShock did. The moment where I realized this is a brilliant, engaging narrative, and it is also an absolutely perfect commentary
mm-hmm.
on the way a video game designer is themselves controlling not just where you go, but like within a screen where you look.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They put a shaft of light.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Grabbed your eye there. I thought that was one of my sort of greatest video game moments ever, where I just sat back in the chair and thought, Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
That is really, really smart. And not just smart, but beautifully executed. I love it.
Also, have you played the second Last of Us Part 2? Yeah.
Just finished it.
Yeah. Well, what struck me about that one as well, in terms of the narrative, was that you've got the whole first half of the game where you're with Ellie, and then you suddenly are. This is obviously a spoiler. I'll warn people of this before. But the second half of the game, you're playing as Abby, who's been this character that obviously killed Joel in the first part, and your instinct is to dislike this person, but by playing as her and taking it through the story, you suddenly, by the end of it, you've warmed. Well, I think most people will have warmed to her. So it's a very clever way of doing it, I thought.
Yeah, absolutely. Big, bold, brave move they did there.
Mm-hmm.
And what it did, amongst other things, was it disproved a bit of, I'm 50 and I grew up around video games, and I would read video game magazines, and there'd be these heated debates about what made games special and stuff like
mm-hmm.
that. There was a theory within video games for a long time, which a very good example of it is Master Chief in the Halo
mm-hmm.
game, who in a way is a bit like Judge Dredd,
mm-hmm.
in as much as, except he's not, because Judge Dredd is actually a very complete character, but Master Chief was a blank character because it was a first-person game and the player had to be given space to project into it.
Yeah.
And I always thought, whether that was what the Halo people were saying or not, I definitely knew people in the industry who were saying that was just wrong. And anybody who's ever read a book and the protagonist is entirely different in every way from the way they are, knows that there is no problem with, we're a bunch of empathy machines, and one thing we don't find difficult is projecting ourselves into characters, and in a way what Last of Us 2 did is it took that to a very sort of clever and extreme end.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I definitely struggled at the very end of Last of Us Part 2 when it's the fight scene between Ellie and Abby, and I kind of realised I I didn't want it to happen. I didn't, you didn't. The narrative
Which
forced
is
to fight.
what they want.
That was exactly, yeah. And it was, it kind of drove home how well done it was.
If I ever had a beer with the people that made that game, that's exactly what I'd ask them about. Is that last fight?
Yeah.
Partly, why is it violent in the way it's violent? Why does it go on as long as it goes on? Why does the player not have the ability to behave in a way that is, as it were, appropriate? I don't mean ethically appropriate, but appropriate to their experience of everything that's preceded.
Yeah.
You have a significant danger of like that Tintin voice thing I was saying, where I think that's not what Tintin sounds like.
Yeah, exactly.
You had the Ellie experience and the
Ambi.
Yeah, exactly. You've had those two experiences, and you now have your own complex feelings. And the chances of this very extended violent scene running roughshod over that experience is high. I would be fascinated to talk to them about that. I suspect it is because there is a point being made. There is a thesis, and the thesis is playing out at that moment.
Yeah, I think.
But the point didn't land on me, because I was thinking, I don't want to kill her.
Yeah, no, that's right.
I know what you mean. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and it was the same actually with the part where you're. Is it before you become Abby, when Ellie gets back to the theatre, and you're chasing her around the back room and shooting her and stuff. I had exactly the same point at that point as well.
But then Abby doesn't kill Ellie.
No, yeah, that's true. Yeah,
and so that felt, I get this, Anyway, it's fascinating, isn't it? I mean, I don't know. What we're talking about. Like, this is the stuff I find interesting. This is what I find myself thinking about again and again and again and again. And one of the interesting thing about writing is then these kinds of, in some ways, quite mechanical discussions and conversations that one needs to have in order that the person who is the recipient of it is having a kind of seamless, emotional experience. Not to take it away from video games, because I love video games, but there was a comparison I have sort of talked about it before in other contexts, but basically what it is, it's the difference between Catcher in the Rye and Ulysses, where you have two novels, one of which is in many ways very like an actual stream of consciousness, and the other one which is in no way like a stream of consciousness. And the one that is not like a stream of consciousness, Catcher in the Rye, the effect of reading it is much closer to a stream of consciousness than Ulysses, which is bloody difficult. And that's the kind of thing. So years ago, when I fantasized, I'd take these books off the shelves to figure out how writers did it, and I'd fantasize that they all sat around talking about things, and I wondered which cafes they went to and if I'd ever joined their club and that kind of thing. That's what I thought that's what they'd talk about.
Well, we get to do it on the podcast at least, so that's good.
Yeah. What we've there's the only I'm trying to remember, there was this book I had which was Paris Review interview. And that was the only place I was able to find, this is pre-internet, writers talking about writing.
So, I mean, you've said that you're hoping to make a film next year. Is that the thing that's on your slate at the moment then?
Yes, and so in that way, I said I'm a pragmatist. I've written a sort of COVID-proof movie.
Right, okay.
It's two people in a house.
Excellent.
Nice.
Partly because I you know, I've been working for years. Most of the people I know in the film industry are crew, and so you get to know about all these other productions dotted around different places and what they're encountering. And one of the interesting things about COVID in my world, I say interesting, I mean, I'm sure you understand the spirit in which I'm saying.
Yeah, absolutely.
COVID, it was absolutely horrible.
Yeah.
Interesting. But it's that big, powerful, mighty productions are more susceptible to it than nimble, smaller ones.
Yeah.
It's like if you were making a $400 million Disney movie right now, it would be terrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if it's a low budget horror movie set in Gloucestershire in a house.
Is that a little hint as to what it might be about?
No, that's not a hint. That's what it's about.
Okay. Even better. That's fine.
What was the last book that you read?
That's an interesting. So this is my sort of weird secret. I don't read.
All right. Okay.
I read a lot when I was a teenager, and there's another writer. He's a very, very good writer. He's one of the only writers I know, and he says what, like, so I was talking about Ballard and Ishiguro. These people I read when I was a teenager. The last novel I read might be Annihilation, which I was sent as a gig. Like, do you want a writing job? I think this is partly because I've got a sort of OCD-ish, or OCD is not the right word, but it's overly concerned with deconstructions, I think. And so I find reading books like having 10 people shouting at me at the same time, because I immediately start looking at sentence structure, punctuation, why is this adjective there?
Yeah.
Or and it freezes me so quickly. And so what happened for a while was that the only books I could read for a few years were books I'd already read. Yeah. And then I kind of checked out, and it's like a version of that Annihilation thing where so what my friend was saying was, it's not just wrong, it's perverse to be a writer who stops reading. And in some weird big experiment way, I've ended up saying, okay, well, let's see, you know. And so I barely read and I barely watch stuff.
Right. Well,
but I do, what I read is essays.
Okay.
That's what I read, is I read lots of essays.
Well, that might also answer the second question, which is, what was the last film you watched? Yeah.
What was the question? It
what was the last film that you watched?
I'm trying to figure out, A, what was the last film? B, do I lie? And C, do I tell the truth? Because it's going to end up being something so kind of nothing. And now I can't say what it is, because then I'm inadvertently insulted. It was a film that had been made for Netflix, and with Bill Murray and Richard.
Oh, yeah. Is that the Sofia Coppola movie? Yeah. Any good?
Yeah.
Was that a lie?
Well, I mean, I'll ask it because we always ask it, but what was the last TV show that you watched, TV series?
Oh, it was, you know what? I wish it wasn't the last one.
You can lie. You don't need to say it.
last TV show I watched was I'm going to lie. Actually, I'm going to lie. It was I May Destroy You.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Michaela Cole. Yeah.
The thing is that I have watched. I've watched some crap because I don't go out much. But in terms of the last thing I saw where I kind of got electrified by it, and I thought this is really interesting. Like this is hitting me on 10 different levels. It was that.
Yeah, it's a tough watch. It's it's quite difficult, and she's not always the most likable character, and it makes you feel things. You kind of question yourself a little bit, and it's a really well done piece of work. I think. I can't say I don't know if I enjoyed it but I really appreciated it. I think.
You know that empathy thing that we were talking about. Like you don't need a blank slate. You can have anybody. Tony Soprano's not a nice guy.
Yeah.
And Walter White's not a nice guy, and Travis Bickle's not a nice guy.
Yeah.
I don't want to get sort of virtue signaling and stuff, but we're very comfortable with men being that.
Yeah.
Having those conflicted thoughts about men. It just comes very naturally because there's so many examples. So she's not traditionally nice, but she is definitely, as well as being all sorts of difficult things, she's incredibly vulnerable. So the vulnerability gives you a big throw in. That for me anyway.
Yeah. No, it's a really good show.
It's great because it's got something virtuoso about it, and so that makes you. It's a funny thing. It's like actors. Like you can be simultaneously locked into the scene they're doing, and also at the same moment thinking they're a very good actor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They should be in conflict with each other. There's one step back and the other's step in. But I felt something like that when I was watching that show. I was both fully in it and also thinking, wow, this is really good.
Yeah. And the very, very last thing we do is a quick fire either or. And I like to say there's no right answer apart from one. So the first one is Sylvester Stallone or Carl Urban.
Oh, yeah, but I clearly made a choice already.
The Walking Dead or Dawn of the Dead?
Dawn of the Dead.
Fancy restaurant or a takeaway?
Fancy restaurant.
TV or cinema?
I'm gonna say cinema, but am I allowed to enlarge on it?
Absolutely, yeah. No,
go for it. Yeah. I'm gonna say cinema because I'd have so little interior life without cinema, and TV was shit when I was growing up for the most part.
Yeah,
and so I'd have to say cinema, but I also think that the best adult drama at the moment is on television.
Yeah,
typically on television.
And the last one, real book or ebook?
For someone that doesn't read.
I would have said real book until about a year ago. And so the truth is, I think I thought I'd sound like a prick. I do read essays. When I said I read essays, I'm often reading science nerdy books.
Right. Okay.
Science nerdy books are basically essay collections.
Yeah.
What I found was that in a funny way, ebooks helped me with that, and I have no idea why. I think it might be portability, because the books I'm talking about are usually big, fucking hard, and so I could have the thing anywhere. But I definitely found I was able to focus in a way that I found harder. Maybe I think it was the hardback. Sorry, this is so banal, but anyway, you have to carve out a moment to read a hardback book.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. It's a lot easier just to quickly get into something on an you can be in that moment a lot faster, I think.
You can read it in your bed easier, certainly.
In the bath? No, not to worry about dropping it.
Like anywhere, like in an airport.
Yeah.
Yeah.
While you're waiting for someone at the fancy restaurant that we've
Yeah, exactly.
I'm very happy to say that is the question which does count, and you gave the correct answer. So
you're joking? Is that
yeah, that is, yeah, you've passed the test. One of the only few people who've passed this. I'm very happy.
It is, yeah.
But so can you tell me what's the failure? Is it pretentiousness? Is it Ludditism? Like, what is it?
I think a lot of people talk about the smell of a book, which makes me think they're a bit weird. And
he's doing physical... this. You see that like Tariq is very much the ebook advocate, and I quite like a real book. So he's just delighted that you said that.
I think who enjoy reading actual books. No, I think there is. I totally get that. There's something nice about the physical book, but for me, I think the plus points of an ebook, the portability, the instantly buying the book straight away without having to leave your bed. You know, that kind of stuff. I do like that stuff a lot.
Yeah, I get it. Well, I'm glad I got the right answer.
Oh, that was a great chat. Really, really enjoyed that.
Yeah,
and really interesting what you were saying about Annihilation. That kind of reading a book and then not reading it again to adapt it and adapting the feeling or the memory of it.
Yeah. No, I mean it is. It's if you've not seen Annihilation, it's worth seeing. But at the same time, I can see why some people thought it wouldn't appeal to a large audience, only because it's not a mainstream story.
No.
It's a great film.
I really liked it. Yeah. And I really enjoyed it, and I will stand by the fact that the shouting bear is one of the scariest things I've seen in films for a long time.
And like I said to Alex, I can't remember. I don't think that's in the book, but it might be. But it totally elicited the same feelings in me watching the film and reading the book, even though they're totally different things. And what he was saying about what is reading, and someone can write a story, but they can't tell you how to read it and how it'll make you feel, kind of a thing. Daniel Abraham was saying a bit of the same thing in the last episode that we had of last season, that the relationship the reader has with what you've written is a different thing entirely that you don't have much control over, I think.
Yeah. No, it's so true. And from what he was saying about his next project, that sounds very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously very early stages, etc. But I'm very excited to see what happens with that.
Yeah, the horror movie set in Gloucestershire.
Yeah, I mean, here's someone who, you look at his catalogue and it's quite eclectic in terms of, you've got zombie movie, sci-fi, comic book, but I think there's a theme throughout them all of big concepts, big important concepts, whether it's a viral outbreak or the sun exploding or crime or whatever, and there's a thoughtfulness to always.
Oh, there is. He's one of the most thoughtful writer directors there is. I think something like Dave's as well is exploring much.
And you're right. It's more recent stuff gets more and more thoughtful. I think as time goes on.
So yeah, he's the sort of creator that you think when you hear. I know he doesn't like taking a film by credit, which is what he said makes a lot of sense. A lot of people make these things, so for the director to put their name on it, I can see what he's saying. But at the same time, when you hear that he's working on a project, it's something that I'm immediately interested in. I don't know what it's going to be about. I don't know if it'll click entirely with me, but it's something that you want to see because he'll have put everything into it.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think that is the difference between, there's a lot of people who work in a film, but it is, at the end of the day, it's his kind of vision that runs through it, in the DNA of the movie. And that is exactly, as you say, what makes it exciting.
So really thanks so much to Alex for taking the time to record that. We really enjoyed it, as as I think you can tell from our chat here. And we can't wait to see this new film that he's got coming out. And if you haven't seen Devs, I think it is still on iPlayer in the UK. It is, yeah. So I would definitely give that a watch.
It's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
And we've got another exciting guest next week, Marco.
We do indeed. Would you like to tell them?
We are chatting to Matt Ruff next week, who is an American author who's written a number of novels and comics, The Mirage, and perhaps most famously Lovecraft Country, which was made into a TV show on HBO.
Yeah, that's right. It's been on Sky, I think, in the UK, or Now TV. But and another really interesting chat, because he's a author that sort of has trodden his own path, really, in terms of what he wants to write and the style that he writes it. He's written some fantasy books, but they're not what you would maybe call conventional fantasy. And even Lovecraft Country as a book is divided into these little episodes,
almost short story type, episode type things. Yeah, it's
like a sort of an anthology almost, but there's an overall connecting story as well. So again, it's a really great chat. So I hope you tune in for that one. Before we go, those of you that listen all the time will know that I always like to ask, if you enjoyed the episode, please do give us a rating and, if possible, a review on your favourite podcast app, because it really helps us climb the rankings. And if we climb the rankings, we can continue to get great guests on the podcast. And if anyone has any questions or comments they would like to send us, they can, of course, get in touch by email, which is podcast@rightgear.co.uk, or Twitter, which is @right_gear. Yeah, and otherwise, we hope you have a great week, and we'll be back next week chatting to Matt. See you then.
Thank you so much for listening to today's conversation with Nadine Matheson. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Be sure to tune in every Tuesday for a brand new episode featuring more amazing guests. Don't forget to like, subscribe and leave a review. It really helps the podcast grow. And if you'd like to support the show, you can buy me a cup of coffee or sign up on Patreon. The links are in the show notes. And if you'd love to join the conversation as a guest, feel free to send an email to theconversation@nadineMatheson.com. Thanks again for your support, and I'll catch you next time.